So let's dive right into a pretty provocative question that's been making the rounds in the queer community. For years, it really felt like nonstop progress, right? But the source material for this explainer takes a hard look at the current political climate and asks a really tough question. Is pride, as we've come to know it, actually over? And this is the question that's really at the heart of it all. It's this deep-seated anxiety. Was all that progress, that growing acceptance that led to huge milestones like marriage equality, was it all just a temporary blip? It's a question that, really gets to the core of the unease a lot of people are feeling right now. I mean, the shift is just staggering when you put a few years ago side by side with today. The source points to 2015 as this real high watermark. You had the Supreme Court legalizing same-sex marriage. Corporations were falling over themselves to release what the source calls these gay-as-hell pride collections. It was a full-on celebration. Fast forward to today, and the source is describing a devastating backslide. We're talking Supreme Court decisions allowing bans on gender-affirming care and corporate pride collections that are so toned down they're basically just beige. Okay, so to really get our heads around this shift, we're going to break it down into 4 key parts. First, we'll look at the specific setbacks the source is pointing to. Then we're going to rewind and explore the historical strategy that actually led to all those past victories. After that, we'll dig into why the trans community seems to be a specific target right now. And finally, we'll look at the source's argument for what the future of pride should be. So let's start with that feeling of sliding backwards. According to the source, this isn't just some vague anxiety. It's a direct response to a whole series of really concrete legal, corporate, and political moves that have all happened in a very, very short amount of time. The source really builds its case with some specific and pretty stark examples. It starts with a Supreme Court decision that it says basically gave a green light for, get this, 27 states to ban gender-affirming care for young people. Then you've got the corporate pullback, with Target's super muted merchandise as the poster child. The source also calls out politicians, people who used to be allies, who are now repeating anti-trans talking points. And it reminds us of things like past executive orders that ban trans people from serving in the military. So to figure out how to move forward from here, the source argues that we first have to look back at what worked. It makes the case that the entire history of the modern LGBTQ+ rights movement was basically powered by one single, incredibly powerful strategy. And that strategy is called unapologetic visibility. The source defines this as the simple but pretty radical act of just living openly. The whole idea was that by refusing to hide, queer people could show the rest of the country that they were, well, just people. The thinking was that this would chip away at the stigma and eventually the laws would follow. It was a strategy based on presence, not trying to persuade anyone. And you can see this strategy just building and building over the decades, becoming more and more visible. It kicked off with the rebellion at Stonewall back in '69. It got a voice with Harvey Milk's famous call to come out. It became impossible for anyone to ignore with ACT UP's powerful die-in protests during the AIDS crisis. And then it went completely mainstream when Ellen DeGeneres came out to 42 million people on her sitcom. The source argues that the 2015 marriage equality decision wasn't an accident. It was the direct result of this long, cumulative history of visibility. So this brings us to the big puzzle. If this strategy of just being visible was so incredibly effective for the gay and lesbian rights movement, why is the trans community, the T in LGBTQ+, facing such an intense, targeted backlash right now? The source offers up a theory, and it's all rooted in political calculation. A huge part of the answer, at least according to the source, comes down to this one number. It cites data showing that the transgender population makes up less than 1% of the U.S. total. And the argument here is that this much smaller population size, well, it makes the community a more vulnerable political target. So the source argues that what we're seeing is a deliberate, calculated political strategy. The logic goes like this. Because mainstream visibility for trans people came later than it did for cisgender gay people, there's just less public familiarity. So the bet was that a smaller, less understood group would be a much easier target for a fear-based campaign. And of course, it relies on that age-old ugly tactic of claiming a minority group is a danger to children. And if this playbook sounds familiar, well, the source argues that's because it is. It's like we've seen this movie before.
Back in the mid-2000s, banning gay marriage was the big political wedge issue. And after, you had commentators and even some Democrats blaming gay people for political losses. The source points out this chilling parallel to today. Anti-trans rhetoric is the new wedge issue, and once again, you're hearing some people blame trans issues for political setbacks.
Okay, so given this really challenging moment and all this history, what's the path forward? Well, the source doesn't just leave us in despair. Instead, it argues that the solution is actually to go back to the very strategy that fueled the movement in the first place. And the absolute core of this proposed solution is this: stop waiting around for politicians and corporations to save the day. The source argues that they are followers, plain and simple, not leaders. They will show up, sure, with the rainbow logos and the supportive statements, but only after the hard, messy, grassroots cultural battle has already been won by the community. So what does that actually look like on the ground? The source lays out this 4-step path to, as it says, win again. First, reject that bland, corporate, beige version of pride. Second, embrace the messy, creative, grassroots, community-led stuff. Third, the foundation is the same as it ever was. Insist on living openly and unapologetically. And finally, and this is crucial, it's about building real coalitions where allies truly have the community's back. And we're not just talking theory here. The source gives these amazing, vivid examples of what this new, unapologetic pride actually looks like. And it's a world away from a rainbow-colored sandwich. We're talking about a late-night show produced by an entirely queer cast and crew. It's a wildly inventive community event like the Twinks vs. Dolls Olympics. And yes, it is literally a wrestling match in a giant vat of nacho cheese, which is described as punk rock, ridiculous, and absolutely unapologetically pridefully queer. This all builds to the source's central conclusion, the quote that really ties the whole argument together. It's a direct appeal to the lessons of the past, the refusal to hide. The insistence on living your life openly and with pride is politically powerful all by itself. It worked then, and it will work now. So we end up right back where we started, but now we're looking at it through a completely different lens. The source makes a powerful case that even though this moment feels like a terrifying backslide, history has already given us the playbook for how to fight back. And that playbook is all about unapologetic visibility, community action, and joy. And so this explainer leaves us with one last big question. Will it be enough to win again?